this one. There we go. So I trust you're seeing only one and not two screens, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So you all know that I just sort of run through these chapters just to remind folks who haven't read them recently where we are. And yeah, so the first chapters, excuse me, I'm going to mute that. The first chapter, she starts with these jobs that she's held, and then the jobs to which she aspires. This whole chapter is on vocation, and I like the fact that she starts with the question of jobs, because jobs, many of us tend to equate jobs and vocation, or careers and vocation. And I think that in the course of the chapter, she sort of helps correct that idea. But she observes that all of her jobs have revealed unknown abilities and exposed some clumsiness, including pouring a Singapore sling down the back of some woman's dress in a restaurant. And that's if you've worked in a restaurant, you know that you get to make those kinds of mistakes and clumsiness. Goes on to again point out something that I think is a sort of common, or at least we certainly hear it in certain circles in the Christian world, that God has a plan or a purpose for your life, and your job is to discover it. But she goes on to ask, how could I discover goes on to ask, how can I discover the vocation that had my name on it? It puts a lot of pressure on us, I think, to wonder. And she relates the wonderful story of discovering this fire escape in a building next to her and climbing up this rickety fire escape, which is where she can actually pray. And the answer comes back, you're supposed to do anything that pleases you. I mentioned yesterday morning, or I asked the question and they mentioned, have you all heard of Richard Bowles? The name may not mean anything to you, but the book, What Color Is Your Parachute?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was written by a guy named Richard Bowles.
I tried to read that. I tried to read that one.
Well, he was an Episcopal priest.
Whoa.
In the Diocese of California. And when he wanted to get married the fourth time, because I guess his parachute wasn't the right color all the other times, the bishop said, not in this church. And so he renounced his vows. And so anyway, but he was the one that said, follow your bliss, and, do what you love and the money will follow. I mean, that was part of his shtick there. And that's very similar to this. You're supposed to do what, anything that pleases you, focus on that, not on money or on all these other kinds of things. And then Brown goes on to quote Luther, point to Luther asserting that, everyone's vocation, our vocation as Christians, is to love God and to love neighbor. That we've heard that before. And then she traces that a little bit further to say, whatever we're doing, we always have the opportunity with whatever tools we have or wherever we are in our work to choose kindness over meanness. And I really like that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I highlighted in the chapter.
Yeah.
Was that what she said there? And I had to sit with that a while, and it resonated with me, but I have to pick apart what that really means. It says, with whatever tools you have at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great philosophy. Not sure how to implement it all the time.
Well, maybe we'll be able to tease that out as we go on a little bit more here, I think. Then in the next section of the book, and I mentioned yesterday morning, and I'll say this now, is that of the 8 chapters that we've read so far, the earlier ones and then the 2 tonight, I found these to be sort of the most poignant chapters, ones that sort of hit me personally, sort of more viscerally. They really went straight into the soul, and it sort of came up in this second piece here. Many folks are missing a sense of purpose in their work. I won't say that hits me. I find a sense of purpose in my work, but I've certainly seen a lot of folks who just sort of go through the motions. And she points out that, sometimes it's necessary to do work that has nothing to do with your sense of purpose because of life circumstances. You need to earn money to support your family, and you find whatever you can that's going to earn you that money, but it's not your sense of purpose. And so the question that she then goes into is this: does your work sustain your sense of purpose? And that most people want to be good at something. And so if you don't feel like you're good at anything, then what does your work do for you? I find these really sort of poignant questions that I've seen, working with college students who they think that they need to. I saw this a lot, and I don't want to typecast or anything like this, but I saw this with a lot of students who come from really, really traditional cultures, and mostly Chinese or East Asian or South Indian, and they're sent off to college with this idea that they're going to be an engineer, they're going to do something so they can earn all this money and go back and support the parents. And they get there and they find that what they really want to do is study literature. That's where their passion is, and they can't do it because the government is paying them to become an engineer. And it's just how do you negotiate that? And I saw this with students. And then she segues into what I really enjoyed was this sort of bit on the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddhist Eightfold Path, and one of those the 8 pieces is right livelihood. Working correctly or working rightly. And she parallels that with sort of karma yoga, work as a spiritual practice. She doesn't spell this out, but I think it's important to see work as a spiritual practice as distinct from working to get salvation. Whatever you do, is that a spiritual practice? Can you see that as a spiritual practice? And that goes into the next question of, then how does your work connect one to other people? So if you see, you're a night watchman, can you see that as a practice of connecting you to other people and therefore as a spiritual practice? Great questions. Great questions. Then says that's different. Work is then being different from vocation, because she says, our vocations may turn out to be the things we do for free. We're not paid for what it is that we really are called to do, but we get paid to do things that other people need, for example. Karen's on this call, and so I will relate a conversation we had on Friday as part of the diocesan convention, where I pointed out and somebody asked a question back to me. I said, ordination doesn't, and being a priest doesn't mean that you're a good counselor, doesn't mean you're a good administrator. Being a priest means that you are ordained to do certain things. to bless things, to pronounce pardon, to work with the bishop. And, somebody said, well, what does that mean? I don't quite get this. And, you're ordained because that's your call. And then you do these other things that help pay the bills, like administer a building and do weddings and teach classes and all of those kinds of things, because that's what a congregation wants you to do. And that's fine. And I love doing all of that. But I did a lot of that, and a lot of other people do a lot of those things without being ordained. But being ordained gives you, that becomes the vocation, and the job is being a rector. So I was thinking about that when we were talking on Friday after having read these chapters. I didn't want to quote Barbara Brown Taylor in the middle of that conversation, Karen. But she'll remember that. And then, being fully human means turning gratitude into some concrete good. And, again, profound sort of consideration. And in Jesus, we see what it means to be both fully human and fully divine. And she talks about, Jesus wasn't running around telling people what to think. He was running around dealing with real human issues. The Gospel of John is a little different than that, with all of those soliloquies about I'm the bread, I'm the light, I'm all of this kind of stuff. But, in a lot of the rest of the Gospels, it's healing people, touching people, helping people, all of those kinds of things. And if that's what it means to be both fully human and fully divine, then in Jesus, that's, what God is showing us, what God wants us to be. So, and then she asks the question, if your old work becomes meaningless, how do she suggests we find something to wash, and perhaps someone else's feet. But washing anything, cleaning, becomes very therapeutic. She didn't use that language, but helps us get back from the idea that we have no meaning. And I love the fact that she says common chores are no longer housework, but domestic arts. It's great image that, okay, I'm going to go upstairs after we're done here, and I'm going to engage in the domestic art of cleaning dishes. Just a great image. And then challenges us to find something that feeds your sense of purpose. Be willing to look high, be willing to look low, but find something that feeds your sense of purpose. And I was reminded of the great line that a lot of people quote now from Frederick Buechner, that our vocation is where our deep joy meets the world's deep need. And, that's the sense of purpose. And if our deep joy is service in one way or another, look high and low and fulfill your joy. So as opposed to just the position or the money or all of those kinds of things. And her implication is that then you'll be satisfied with what that you're doing what you were called to do. So that was my sort of take on the chapter. And I don't want to presuppose that was what everybody else saw. But what were your all's takes?
Well, I kind of saw her epiphany or aha moment on the fire escape stairs and stuff, the abandoned building, with Luther's statement of finding something that brings you joy, that you love, but keeping God center, really meaningful for me. So where I work for, the VA, and as the government agency, that doesn't seem like more than, okay, I'm choosing the benefits and the paycheck and the stability. But I know that within my field and the contracts that I write and the orders that I've made over the 5 years that, well, I've been with the VA for 7, but, and when I was the first 2 years were direct connection, but now I know that without the improvements to the buildings and the things that I oversee, that our veterans don't have the care that they deserve and that they need. So, which is what drew me to the VA to begin with, was being able to make it a better place for veterans. And long family history of veterans, and between my father and my grandfather, some very horrific examples of poor medical treatment. And I could easily be angry at the system. But, you know, hearing that and going, yes, that's exactly what it is. You know, I'm in there trying to make it better in my little way, and keeping God and him wanting to heal and nurture his people, and allowing those that have those skills to be able to do those.
Thank you. Karen, Whit, any thoughts on this chapter? I mean, we can go to the questions, but I you know, they're there as a backup. So
Yeah, I appreciated, like Christina, her considering vocation as the mystery that it really is. And in the Christian context, it is a Christian mystery. It's something that you discern. And I'm not just talking about ordained ministry, because lay people discern their Christian vocation as well. So it's been a long time since I've dealt with vocation as a in the traditional sense of being a job. I think the meaning, yes, it can be a paid, non-paid, it can be Christian or other religious path. It can be all sorts of things. And I like how she sort of addresses its bigness.
I remember I was talking to one of the advancement people at DU long time ago, and raising money is not something, or fundraising, or doing the ask, or all of those kinds of things is not something that comes naturally to me. I find it, you know, it's just not my charism. And he said, you know, there are a lot of people who want to do good, and they have a lot of money, but they don't know how to do it. And our gift, he was talking about people in advancement or fundraising, is to help them see how they can do good with their money in various ways that they might not have seen otherwise. And you know, this person said this with all sincerity. I'm not, and it was just something I'd never ever thought about. And it related to Susan was the Christian education director at a very, very wealthy church in Southern California, and for a couple of years. And the parking lot was filled with Jags and Bentleys and Rollses and things like that. And the rector pointed out to her and me at one point, he said, you know, these people, most of them did not earn their money. They inherited it, and have a sense of guilt about all of this money that they have control over, that they didn't do anything to get. And the ministry of the church was to help them recognize that they had, abilities to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And also to sort of assuage their guilt that it's not your fault that you were born with all this money, and again, it was one of those things I just never would have thought of. I never would have thought of. So, yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting. When you think of old money, when I think of old money, I don't think of people wanting to do good with it as a dominant trait. I think of more of people feeling entitled, entitled to better treatment, better service, better of this and that. I think the fact that those people in your story, which I appreciate you telling that, the fact they were going to church means they were missing something. Either they had been raised in the church, it was the thing they're supposed to do, but still what kept them coming back might have been a hole inside of them that needed to be filled.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love metaphors, and I think I might have mentioned this before. To me, the metaphor that I've thought about in terms of Church of the Good Shepherd is that Good Shepherd, we are like sheep, and Good Shepherd is like a feeding trough. And initially, you come to church to be fed. Now, that means different things for different people, but evidently, there's something inside of you that's empty. You need to be fed. And pretty soon, the trough starts to get low. And some of the sheep have to get up and go around the other side and fill the trough.
Hmm.
Not necessarily the sheep. It's not, but I mean, this is a metaphor, not reality,
Sure,
of course.
sure. Yeah.
And so we can't always just say, well, it's up to the priest to fill the trough. So it works both ways. So the fact that I'm guessing that a lot of those folks you're talking about that had the means to really do good, we're seeking something. I'm not sure all of them were terribly guilty, but that certainly probably was a percentage that were guilty and needed this outlet to do good with the means that they had. So that's really interesting. And again, a different perspective than what I had looked at, as you mentioned, those two stories about people wanting to do good with their money.
Yeah. And of course, this was somebody who was working, the person who was telling me the story was somebody who was working for a secular institution. But if you think about a church or religious institution and people who are associated with those religious institutions, their desire to do good with what they have, it might even be greater, than somebody who just wants to make the proper investment or to get their name on a building.
Right.
So yeah, it's not all one way, that's for sure. But it sort of did take me back, and I think your point about there's a hole there that some people want filled and they come looking, and what do we bring? What do we as the church or as people of God bring to those hurting people? That's it sort of took me away from thinking about the only needy people are down on Skid Row, right? They may not be, they may be on Corporate Row. It's just that the needs are different, and we often prioritize in our needs hierarchy the physical needs as opposed to some of these others that are just as great. And I'm going to shut it up here in a second, but we hear all of these stories about the people in third world countries who don't have all of the stuff that we have, but seem to be much more fulfilled internally, with greater joy, greater hospitality. They'll give away anything when they don't have nothing, and how different that is. So it's it was just such a profound realization on my part.
Yeah.
Whit, I want to
So-
thank you for bringing up the fact that your metaphor actually reminded me of some, and it goes into this vocation idea, that it may not be the job that you're being paid for, or how you earn the living, how you support your family and yourself, but in coming and seeking, we're at different places at different times in our lives, that sometimes we're seeking healing or purpose or wholeness, but at other times we've been fed that, we've drunk at the trough, and now we're seeking a way to give that back to others that were in that same position that we were
Yeah,
in.
there's times.
So using
There's
those
times where
gifts to feed others. Yes.
there's times where you definitely need to be on both sides of the trough at one time or another. It's
Yeah.
Now, I was thinking, I didn't raise this question yesterday, although I could have, but it didn't occur to me. But Christina and I are still fully employed, and the other two of us on this call are retired, and wondering, like I said, I could have raised this question yesterday because in the discussion there were both people who are still employed and people who are retired, as to what it is on that other side of I'm retired that says now I can fulfill my vocation, or now my vocation is different. What is that secular transition point that's marked by retirement? Where does that fit with sort of vocation? And just being able to see the two of you on my screen in this way, not putting you on the spot, it just raised the question for me about what does vocation look like when career is taken out of the equation.
Well, I'm going to let Karen go first, but I just want to say that there is so much in this chapter to unpack. It's too bad we're doing 2 chapters a week.
Oh, the next chapter is even worse.
I'm gonna let Karen
Better
go
start
first.
reading that tomorrow.
I'm gonna let Karen go first.
Thanks, Wet. I've only been retired since February. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And I'm also the senior warden. So it's
Are you really retired then?
so, and plus all the other stuff going on. So I can speak for the last few months, and there's been a pandemic. So and I've been on a computer now for 2 years. So I'm still very much I'm using all my professional training in terms of good work habits. I can plow through the work. This is my 3rd video call today, or class, or whatever, webinar. And to me, it doesn't seem like I'm retired. It seems almost as though I'm still working, because I'm still employing that ethic in all these corners of what I'm doing. But I think as time goes on and my work, or my ministry, or however you want to term it, starts to shift a little bit, it will definitely feel different. But I also did sort of non-pay vocational work for a long, long time, even as I was working. And I think the best example of that was working in homeless shelters. It became my job to inspect, my self-imposed job to inspect the clothing that was donated to make sure it was suitable for a human being to wear. That it didn't have holes, it wasn't stained, that sort of thing. So I kind of cultivated that side of vocational, non-paid vocational work for a really long time too. I can't do that now because of the pandemic, but that's all I can say. Whit?
There. I apologize for being muted there, but I was trying to find a book, and is a great book because I think we're all seeking. We continue to seek throughout life, even though when we're working, we may say, I'm doing what I need to do, or I'm doing, the thing that I was meant to do, which I never, looking back at my professional life of 31 years, 4 months, and 19 days.
Not counting down, did you?
Not that I was counting, but that is exactly in my, my primary career. That's what I did. However, I've been retired since 2002. So I've had a lot of time to think about this. But the book that I was trying to recall, I got because I wanted to, after I retired, to really find out what my true purpose in life was. And the subtitle of the book was Finding Your True Purpose in Life, or something like that. But the title was very catchy, and it was something like, God's plan, or what's God's plan, or whatever. I don't know. I'll think about it. The guy's name was Richard Ferrie, I think, Ferrie. Anyway, the author. But you go through this book, and the first half of the book is all about these stories about people and what they did and what they found true meaning in, and blah, blah, blah. And the back part of the book was all these exercises so you could go through to really nail down what your true purpose in life is. And I'll cut this short. I got down to where I'm making this list, and I thought, boy, we're getting close now. I'm really going to find out what I was supposed to do. And it finally occurred to me what I really was supposed to do, or my true purpose in life. And this is not grandiose, or I can't think of the right words. It wasn't a big epiphany. But what I decided my true calling was to fix things that broke.
Huh.
And I mean, that's not a big deal, to most people. That, yeah, well, okay, you should
That
have
can
been
be a very big deal for
Yeah.
people that have the broken item and
Right.
need to keep going.
Well, and I want to say this: I struggled throughout my professional career because I was in telecommunications, and I was climbing the ladder and all the things you're supposed to do, and I got knocked down a couple of times, and had an okay career, decent job, decent pay. One of the few people that stayed with the same company or iterations of the company for over 30 years, and was able to get a retirement and all that stuff. Great. But one of the most fulfilling jobs I had was when I worked for Ace Hardware, because people would come in with problems of things that were broken and they needed fixed. And because I'd been around a while and done a lot of things, I was a lot of times, not always, but I was able to help them, and was able to find what they needed to fix what was broken. And I've got a lot of satisfaction out of that. I started there at $9 an hour in 2000 and I don't remember now, it doesn't matter, but I was there 7.5 years. And I finally got up to making a whopping 13 something an hour. Having come off a job where I'd been making a lot more. But anyway, I had my retirement, so I really didn't necessarily need the money, except it was nice to have the extra money. But that's one of the jobs I found the most fulfilling.
Mhm.
And but again, there's a lot of things in this chapter that I could look at and say, wow, that was me, or how stupid was that, you know.
Right, right.
But that's it.
Well, thank you, Whit. Yeah, fixing things is, you know, you could see in some respects that was what Jesus was doing, right? Broken people, people who were disabled, people who were blind, people who were demon possessed, people who were all the. And what did Jesus do? He fixed it. You know, he fixed that? Is there a holier calling? Is salvation anything more than just helping people be whole? And whether it's their electrical system in their house or it's their soul, you know, to help them be whole in those ways. You know, we had some. I can look up right over my head right now in my basement, and there's a ceiling tile that's askew because I had to. During last winter, when I was spending so much time in the basement, I was using extra power, and we have aluminum wiring, and some of it didn't do what it was supposed to do. So I had to have somebody come in and fix this thing over my head right now, and I couldn't do it. But life was a whole lot easier and a whole lot more satisfying when somebody came in and just did that little thing. So I think fixing is a very holy enterprise.
Well, part of this book was finding your gifts.
Yeah.
You know, your unique purpose in life was the subtitle. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and look that book up again. But anyway, yeah, we weren't all meant to be able to do all things.
No.
No.
So
and unfortunately, we can't. I'm just gonna. I mean, you're right. We could spend all night on this chapter, and we could spend all night on the next chapter. But
we need to move on.
Yeah. So that
I just want to say something fast.
Please.
Whit just said this book is about finding your gifts, and I agree with that. But I also think that she kind of makes an important point. It's also finding presence in what you're doing, particularly this vocation chapter. So it's not that that it makes you happy, but somehow it brings a sense of presence and an ability to focus on that, as she talks about Mother Teresa and how she wasn't a nice person, so that allowed people to focus on their work. I mean, I think that's kind of all part of it. You know, that story about the monk who wanted to be an abbot and ended up peeling potatoes in the kitchen and found that to be such godly work and so full of presence. So that's kind of where I see also what she's saying.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Karen, is that we have a tendency to equate happiness and joy, and I think you're drawing attention to that distinction, that joy is something deeper, that maybe having to do with presence than just, oh gosh, this makes me feel good right now. Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. So the next chapter, and I think this is the one that probably hits many of us really hard, is the practice of saying no, which she translates into Sabbath. And I know that she gets there in terms of Sabbath in and of itself. But I love the fact that she starts with this getting to yes. And this book that some of us may remember. But she also says that, yes is the pleasure of knowing someone wants you. And you get the opportunity to say yes because somebody said, will you? But then she turns to the dark side, and we complain about having too much to do, but we want to be in demand. Oh, I have so much to do, but yes, I'll do this for you. And points out that there aren't very many advocates for the spiritual practice of saying no. No, we'll get to more of that, because our cultural worth is measured by how busy we are. How well can we multitask? How many computer screens do we have open at the same time while we have our phone going, and and we're grooming the dog all at the same time? How much can we put together all at the same? My dog's down here behind me, so that's one of the reasons I keep. How busy can we be? But again, the dark side, is busyness and sleep deprivation. She talked about that 3 o'clock hour that seems, she said, what is it about 3 o'clock? And I looked at it, long before I read this book, I looked that up. I said 3 o'clock wakefulness, or 3 o'clock in the morning, what is it? And, there's some biological things that are going on, like our glucose level goes down and our body's trying to accommodate that and all these other kinds of things. But,
Wait till you get
busyness.
much older, or 3 o'clock in the morning, you understand what it's about. Because you have to get up.
Yeah, well, yeah. And then there are other biological things that are going on. She hasn't pointed out, but alcohol exacerbates that because of what happens. Again, glucose levels, hormonal levels, all these kinds of things. So, but you wake up for whatever reason, whether it's a bladder or something else, and then all of a sudden, all of the demons, I call them the nighttime demons, the ghosties and ghoulies is how I refer to them. It sort of creep in, and but a lot of that is because of the busyness. We've got to solve all these problems. And I love the fact then, last chapter she was all Luther, and this chapter it's all Barth, and Barth was kind of a Lutheran Calvinist. But a being is free only when it can determine and limit its activity. And wow, most of us who are employed aren't free in that way, because our professions help determine and limit our activity. We have to go to work. There are these things that we need to do. And she goes from that into saying, okay, well, now I am free on my first Sabbath in 20 years of parish ministry. What do I do? And we don't even know what to do with our freedom. What a challenge. It took her a while to figure it out. And that God invites us into Sabbath. And why are we so reluctant to accept the invitation? It's more than Sabbath, but that was the focus of certainly the focus of this chapter. And she then says, part of it's this shift in culture, is that in the last 50 years, 50, 60 years, technology has changed, the way economics has worked, and then of course the drive of consumerism, the keeping up with the Joneses. We've got to have more. We've got to have more. The only way we're going to do that is to work more. Contrasted with God resting after creating everything. God said, "Oh, that's enough, and I don't have to do anything more. I can just sort of rest." Powerful image. And I loved her meditation on sort of holy envy with the Sabbath, and lighting the Sabbath candles. And I'd never, I knew that there were 2 Sabbath candles that were lit. I knew enough about Sabbath traditions in Judaism, but I didn't make this connection the way that she did. I'd never been taught this. I'd never heard this. And I'd certainly never paid attention to the sort of second Sabbath candle coming from Deuteronomy, but the first one being, you're made in God's image and God rested on the seventh day, so you should rest. That one I'd heard. But the one about you're made in God's image, so you're free, that one I'd never heard. I'd never seen that rationale in the commandment in Deuteronomy, which was to me really profound. And then, goes on to say, Sabbath is God's gift not only to us, but to the earth, to tired fields, the tired vines, the tired land, all of those things that aren't us as individual humans, but all of this other stuff that also needs rest. And how do we give it rest, including the people that work for us, or the slaves in that world. And that Sabbath is the great equalizer. She talks about the common worker being in church with the CEO, and they're both there. That great equalizer. And those of us who flee Sabbath worship a different God. I think that's probably true, and I'm as guilty of that. As all of us are, I think. And how do we help but take on the character of that God? What we expect of ourselves, we soon begin to expect of other people, and therefore limit their access to the Sabbath. Sabbath is the true God's gift to those who wish to rest and be free. How do we see that as a gift? Oops, one screen too far. Once you've decided to take one whole day off from earning, that's earning, not earthing, earning your own salvation, are you ready to wrestle with the brawny angels who show up? And she, sort of hinted at that early on when she was saying, well, no, this is my first Sabbath. What do? I got to do something. And then she realizes maybe not. And talks about the Sabbath sickness. Well, that was nice. Now let's go back to work. I'm getting to the point of my life where I think that was nice. How do I get more? And maybe that's a good sign. And she suggests that if this is hard, start small. Just take an hour off. Turn off your phone. Go outside. Don't do anything. Don't rake the leaves. Just sit and smell the leaves or look at them. And then she points out something that I knew, but I keep forgetting. Observing the Sabbath is a commandment. It's a commandment. It has no less import or stature than thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not commit adultery. I mean, they are all commandments. They're one of the 10. It's one of the 10. And how do we reconcile that with, all of the other stuff? Hard. And then there's no saying yes to God without saying no to God's rivals, of which there are many. So again, this was sort of my take on the chapter. I invite hope that you all saw something more.
Well, I'm of the age to know when I was younger, growing up, grocery stores were not open on Sunday. Texas in particular had what they call blue laws. And and then they opened up where grocery stores could be open, but they had tape that strapped off the aisles of things you couldn't buy because those weren't supposed to be sold on Sunday. And that was the extreme. It really, this was before the days of 7-Eleven. So back in the day, we didn't have convenience stores as such. We did, but we called them ice stations.
Oh,
because that's where you went to buy your blocks of ice. Or if you wanted crushed ice, they had a machine and they got a bag out, a paper bag, and they stuck it under the machine and they dropped the 25 or whatever, how much ice you wanted in this machine. And as a kid and being mechanically oriented, I was fascinated with that because it was making a lot of noise and spitting out crushed ice. So we could run down to the ice station on Sunday, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And so she talked about all the prohibitions on Sunday, in the book. Well, some of you may not have lived that. I did. The other thing was when you were talking about busyness and all, or she was, and then you reiterated it. We have become humans doing instead of human beings.
Yep.
And that sounds trite. It's a big difference.
Yeah. Your story about the ice station. When in 1988, okay, so this is not in the 50s. I moved to North Carolina, and Susan hadn't joined me yet. She was finishing up her job in Southern California, and I went to an 8 o'clock service, 8 o'clock church service on a Sunday morning, and then I went to the grocery store because I was going to watch a football game that afternoon. And Harris Teeter, it was a Kroger, it was the Kroger of, it was the King Soopers of North Carolina. And I went to the grocery store, and they didn't have tape on the aisles. But I went and I grabbed a 6-pack of beer, and I went to the counter, and the clerk said, you can't buy that now. And I said, why not? She said, it's not 1 o'clock. So it was, I could buy it after 1 o'clock on a Sunday, but not before 1 o'clock on a Sunday. So that was the sort of the residual blue laws. You couldn't buy it until 1 o'clock because that's when the football game should start, I guess. I don't know what it was.
That's when church was finished.
Church is out or something like that, But this was 1988 when, so I hear exactly what you're saying, only in slightly different context. But I remember, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I remember, doing things on Sundays. You went to church, came home and you ate, and then you went for a Sunday drive. Because that was your entertainment. There wasn't anything else going on. So I mean, that cultural piece has been huge for us on Sabbath. And she does point out the difference between Sabbath and Sundays,
Right,
which
absolutely.
Christians have sort of mashed together.
I like her. I like the metaphor of her talking about the Jews and the Christians got a divorce, and so we each had our own holy days.
Yeah.
Christina and Karen, we've taken up a lot of your time. You guys have
That's right.
thoughts on this?
I was just curious I was also struck of the 2 candles, the 2 Shabbat candles. So when she talks about the freedom candle, I understand what she's saying, but is that the same as Jubilee? Freeing the slave. She's saying in the Torah, it is the freeing of the slaves, forgiving debts. Isn't that the Jubilee? Is that the Jubilee that we Christians?
I don't know. I'll look. I've got a Bible here right next to me. So being a good priest, you'll understand that, Karen, from the other
Thank
day.
you.
I must have a Bible and a prayer book
Let's
right next to me.
challenge the priest.
Yeah.
Fine.
It's in chapter 5. No. So in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, it's the second restating of the 10 Commandments. So it's just the rationale is different. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Don't have any other gods before me. Don't bow down to them. I'm loyal and gracious. Don't use the Lord your God's name as if it were don't take it in vain. Keep the Sabbath day holy and treat it as holy exactly as the Lord your God had commanded. That's this. So it's not related to Jubilee. That the Jubilee stuff is all different. This is a restatement of the 10 Commandments, but it comes right out of.
It did talk about them getting out of Egypt, though, out of slavery.
Right, and but in Exodus 20, I'm flipping back to that. She's pretty decent scholar.
Different Jubilee.
Yeah, so in Exodus 20, don't make an idol, anything like that. Just remember the Sabbath day and treat it as holy. 6 days you may work and do all your work. Seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Don't do any work, because the Lord made the heavens and the earth and then rested on the seventh day. So um, in Deuteronomy, keep the Sabbath day holy. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day, all of this stuff happens. And then remember that you were a slave in Egypt. But the Lord your God brought you out there with a strong hand. That's why the Lord commands you to keep the Sabbath day. So there are different rationales. One is because God did God's work and then rested from God's work. And the other one is clearly because you've now been given rest from all of that work that you were made to do in Egypt. They're very wow. I just never, ever heard that.
The freedom aspect, just, I had never heard of that either. That is truly amazing.
Yeah.
She's a great scholar. And then the other thing that I sort of liked is when she said, keep a vision of the Sabbath, because, I mean, nurses and doctors in COVID can't keep a Sabbath. So the idea of the spirituality of the Sabbath and really keeping the essence of the Sabbath, even, we have all these artificial laws and you can't buy beer and all that sort of thing. But that's really what the Sabbath is. It's a spiritual ideal that you need to keep. I like that.
Yeah.
I kind of like that as well. And I think that tied into her saying that it's the great it's the great equalizer. Those who flee the Sabbath worship a different God. So when I think of those who need to work on Sunday, that it's not because they're choosing to not observe, but because that's what they need to do. Good point. In nurses and doctors, firefighters, policemen, even clerk or grocery clerks and stuff, because we don't observe those blue laws now. That for them to support their families, they have to go to work on those Sundays. But I look at it is that the fleeing the Sabbath worship. Okay, so maybe that means that they go to an evening service. Maybe that means they hold their day off as the day of rest and reflection and worship in whatever way that takes form for them in their traditions or their abilities on the day that they have off. That keeping that spirit of it is still the same essence. Rather, it's the same day that tradition says it should be.
Yeah. Two things about that. One is, again, I was in the South, and when I was working as a chaplain at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, we had a great secretary, good Southern Methodist, and I went into the office on Monday, one day, and she said, "Well, what'd you do yesterday?" That being Sunday. I said, "Well, I mowed the lawn, I did this, I did that." And she said, "It's the Sabbath. How can you do that?" I said, "I'm clergy. I work on Sunday." Oh, I'd never thought of that. So that's one piece about what is Sabbath. Is it a day or is it an attitude or a time? But it also goes back to what I was trying to do several years ago when I was saying, let's honor athletes and athletes' families, because we're not going to win against, Sunday soccer. So how do we say that the Sabbath is a different kind of way of being, or how do we be church, and allow people to do this? We're not going to win that battle, but we can win other battles and provide other opportunities. And so I think you're absolutely right, Christina, that it's an attitude as much as anything else. And then how do we as a church, an individual or larger, say we are not Sabbatarians, that says that it has to be this time frame, or that it has to be coincident with the Jewish Sabbath or something like that. I mean, we broke from that 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then we've modified it, probably in America more than any place else, to say that it's got to be blue laws and it's got to be this other stuff. It's interesting historical progression. So other
I know
thoughts.
we went over time, but Gary, I have to ask, how was the fishing?
Yeah, Karen, you weren't with us last Monday night. I was in Basalt and we were having this conversation. The other three of us. Tuesday, a week ago tomorrow, was one of the best days of fishing I've ever had. I outfished my mentor both Tuesday and Wednesday. Yeah. In fact, on Tuesday, I outfished him 3-1. I caught 16, he caught 5. And I lost 2 flies and he lost over a dozen. So it was, and when he took off he left the night before I did. And he said, you just need to know that since we were here 6 years ago, boy, have you improved. And that was as good a part of the whole time off as anything else, was just being affirmed, to say, okay, those 6 years of fishing, and he and I fish every, a couple of times a year together. So but so it was great. So thank you for asking. It was just so satisfying, and he was so happy, because it was beautiful, and he didn't have to work. He was just fishing with a friend,
Right.
as opposed to fishing with a client.
Yeah.
And he's a smart guy. We understand one another really well, and so it was great. So the fishing was fine. The catching was great. The next day, we didn't catch as many, but again, I still outfished him. Not quite. I think it was 2-1 instead of 3-1. But I feel now like, okay, well, I maybe I know a little bit about what I'm doing.
Were they different varieties or mainly browns, cutthroats?
It was browns and rainbows, and it was the same river one day to the next, and and it was just different. And we fished even the same places that we'd fished the previous day. It was just different. That's what fishing is all about. The conditions change. And it's a great metaphor. But thanks for asking, Whit. I really appreciate it. And it was so great to be with you guys last Monday. When we signed off and I went into the room, I was sitting outside, Karen, for your information. I was sitting outside so that Dick could not be disturbed by my conversation. He said, "Well, how was the conversation?" I said, "It was just wonderfully fulfilling and refreshing." And it was. So thank you both.
Good. Well, thank you for continuing to do this. So I'm going to sign off. Thanks again.
All right.
All of you.
Yes. Thank you all. You're a blessing in so many ways. So have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. See you next week.
Yep.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.